Emily Whitmore stepped off the plane, exhausted from the grueling 2-month business trip that had taken her across Europe, curating exhibitions for some of the most prestigious galleries. She had spent weeks surrounded by breathtaking art, long negotiations, and endless events, but now, all she wanted was the simple comfort of home. The thought of surprising her husband, John Whitmore, filled her with a quiet sense of excitement, a much-needed break from the sterile hotel rooms and rushed phone calls that had defined their last few months apart. As she maneuvered her luggage into a taxi, the familiar skyline of Chicago welcomed her back, the city's lights shimmering against the evening sky. The exhaustion in her body felt lighter now that she was almost home. Almost back to the man she had shared the last 8 years of her life with, the man who had always supported her career despite its demanding nature. She imagined walking through the front door, seeing his face light up with surprise, hearing his voice filled with warmth as he pulled her into his arms. But as the taxi pulled onto her quiet suburban street, an unexpected sight sent a ripple of unease through her. A sleek black BMW was parked in her designated spot, a car she didn't recognize, a car John had never mentioned. Her brow furrowed as she stared at it, her tired mind struggling to make sense of its presence. Maybe a visitor, maybe a friend of John's, maybe something completely innocent. Still, as she stepped out of the taxi, rolling her suitcase behind her, another detail made her hesitate. The garden, once carefully curated with plants she had chosen specifically to avoid triggering her severe allergies, had been altered. The delicate arrangement of hypoallergenic flowers she had planted over the years was gone, replaced by vibrant hydrangeas, the very flowers her doctor had warned her to stay away from. Something was wrong. The feeling lodged itself deep in her chest, a slow, creeping sensation that made her fingers tighten around the suitcase handle. The house was the same, yet different, familiar yet changed in a way she couldn't immediately place. She took a deep breath, shaking off the unease, telling herself she was overthinking, that there was a reasonable explanation for all of this. And yet, as she reached for the key in her purse and stepped toward the front door, the weight of uncertainty settled heavily on her shoulders, an unshakable whisper in the back of her mind telling her that what waited on the other side was not the homecoming she had imagined. Emily pushed open the front door, expecting the familiar silence of an empty house, but instead, she was met with the unfamiliar thrum of music playing from the living room speakers. It wasn't the jazz or soft instrumental playlists she and John usually had in the background. It was something else entirely, something louder, more upbeat, completely out of place in her home. The scent of spices drifted through the air, rich and unfamiliar, carrying the distinct aroma of a dish she had never cooked in her life. She stepped inside cautiously, the wheels of her suitcase barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. Her exhaustion was momentarily replaced by confusion, a growing unease coiling in her stomach as she followed the scent and sound toward the kitchen. When she reached the doorway, she froze. A tall, slender blonde woman stood at the stove, stirring a pot with the kind of ease that suggested she had done it many times before. Her movements were unhurried, practiced, completely at home in the kitchen that Emily had designed and cared for over the years. Draped over her form, stretched slightly over an unmistakably pregnant belly, was Emily's favorite apron, the vintage one she had inherited from her grandmother, the one she never let anyone else wear. For a long moment, Emily could do nothing but stare, her mind struggling to piece together the impossible reality before her. Every nerve in her body screamed that this wasn't right, that this was a violation, that she was standing in what should have been the safest place in the world, and yet, somehow, she was the outsider here. The woman, sensing her presence, turned slowly, her expression calm, almost amused, her blue eyes assessing Emily with a familiarity that sent a chill down her spine. There was no shock, no embarrassment, no startled fumbling of words, only a small, knowing smile as if she had been expecting this moment. "Oh, you must be Emily," the woman said, setting the wooden spoon down with a casual grace that made Emily's skin prickle. "John said you wouldn't be back for another 3 weeks." Emily felt as if the air had been knocked from her lungs, her pulse hammering in her ears as she struggled to process the surreal moment unfolding before her. The blonde woman, still completely at ease, wiped her hands on Emily's apron before offering a polite, almost practiced smile. "I'm Lauren Davis," she said smoothly, as if she were introducing herself at a dinner party rather than standing in another woman's home, cooking in her kitchen, wearing her belongings. "I suppose this is a bit of a surprise for you." Emily's mouth felt dry, her heart racing in her chest as she forced herself to speak. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" Lauren let out a small, breathy laugh, the sound light but unnervingly condescending. "Oh, I assumed John would have told you by now, but I guess that's typical of him," she said with a shrug, resting a hand on her noticeably pregnant belly in a gesture that sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through Emily. "I'm having his baby." The words landed like a slap, each syllable striking with brutal finality. "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head as if denying it would make it untrue. "That's not possible." "That's not." Lauren tilted her head, her expression shifting into something almost pitying. "We've been together for 18 months, she said matter-of-factly, as if that length of time justified the betrayal. "I moved in 6 weeks ago, right after you left for your trip." Emily's stomach twisted violently, her mind reeling, her vision swimming as she stumbled back a step. 18 months. A year and a half. A secret life running parallel to the one she thought she had been building with her husband. Without another word, she turned on her heel, her body moving before her brain could catch up, driven by the desperate need to make sense of what was happening. Her steps quickened as she moved through her house. But with each room she entered, the suffocating reality pressed harder against her chest. Her belongings were gone, erased, as if she had never existed here. The bookshelves in the living room, once carefully arranged with art books and treasured keepsakes, now held foreign objects, decorative pieces she had never chosen. The walls that had once displayed framed photos of her and John from their travels, their wedding, their life together, were stripped bare of any trace of her. In their place were new photos, fresh and carefully arranged, all of them showing John and Lauren, laughing, embracing, their lives intertwined in a way that made Emily's head spin. She staggered toward the bedroom, her fingers gripping the doorframe as she stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat as her gaze landed on the final betrayal. The bed she had shared with John for 8 years had been remade in new linens, decorated in a style she would never have chosen. Lauren's clothes hung in the open closet, her jewelry resting on the vanity, her perfume lingering in the air. Emily's legs felt weak, her hands shaking at her sides as she turned in slow, stunned horror. She had been erased. Her home, her marriage, her life, all of it had been rewritten without her. And worst of all, she had never even seen it coming. The front door swung open, and John Whitmore stepped inside, shaking the rain off his coat as he set down his briefcase. He moved with the easy familiarity of a man returning to a space that belonged to him, a man who expected no surprises, no disruptions. But the moment his eyes landed on Emily standing in the middle of the living room, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief, he froze. For a brief second, real shock flickered across his face, his mask slipping, his body tensing as if caught in something he had not anticipated. Then, just as quickly, he schooled his features, straightened his posture, and let out a measured breath, slipping effortlessly into the calm, detached persona he had perfected over the years. "Emily," he said, his voice carefully controlled, his tone neutral, almost businesslike. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon." Emily's nails dug into her palms, her entire body rigid as she took a step forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Clearly." John sighed, as if this entire situation was nothing more than an unfortunate inconvenience, then gestured toward the kitchen where Lauren had appeared, leaning against the doorframe with a serene smile on her lips, her hands resting on her pregnant stomach. "I was going to tell you everything myself," John continued, his tone clipped, as if reading from a prepared script. "But since you're here, we might as well get straight to it." He reached for his briefcase, flicked it open, and pulled out a neatly stacked set of papers, placing them on the coffee table between them. His movements were methodical, his expression blank, as if he were closing a business deal rather than dismantling 8 years of marriage. "I've already had the divorce papers drawn up," he said with forced politeness. "I need you to sign them." Emily didn't move, her gaze locked on him, waiting, searching for something. Remorse, regret, even shame. But there was nothing. Only the same cool, calculated detachment she now realized had been growing in him for far longer than she had noticed. She exhaled sharply, her hands trembling only slightly as she reached for the stack of papers, flipping through them without looking at him. The words blurred together at first, the legal jargon swimming in front of her eyes, but then a particular clause caught her attention, something buried deep within the documents, something that made her blood run cold. She read it again, her breath catching in her throat as the reality of it hit her. "You're trying to take control of the family charity," she said, her voice low but filled with quiet fury. "The foundation my parents built, the one that funds art programs for underprivileged children. This has nothing to do with our divorce, John. This is theft." John's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look surprised. He had been prepared for this, had expected her to find it, had already crafted a response in his mind. "I've been managing the finances for years, Emily," he said smoothly, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. "It only makes sense that I continue handling it. You've been too busy with your work, traveling, focusing on your career. The foundation needs stability." Emily let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head as she stared at the man she had once trusted, the man she had loved. "This isn't about stability. This is about control. You didn't just replace me in this house, in this marriage. You're trying to erase everything I've ever built, everything that still connects me to this life." John's lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, there was a flicker of irritation in his expression, the first crack in his perfect composure. Lauren, still watching the exchange with a quiet, almost amused detachment, finally stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on John's arm before turning her gaze to Emily. "There's no need for hostility," she said softly, her voice smooth, practiced, as if she had rehearsed this moment a dozen times. "John and I are building a future together. We wanted to handle this as respectfully as possible." Emily turned to Lauren, the woman who had not only taken her husband but had taken her home, her space, her life, and she felt something inside her shift. It wasn't just anger. It was resolve. She slowly set the papers down, her movements controlled, deliberate, refusing to give John or Lauren the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. She met John's gaze head-on, her voice steady, unwavering. "I am not signing anything today," she said firmly. "And I promise you, John, you will not take what does not belong to you." A silence fell between them, heavy and charged, but Emily didn't back down. John exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against his briefcase, his jaw clenched in frustration. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Emily." She tilted her head slightly, offering him a sharp, humorless smile. "No, John. You did that the moment you let another woman move into my home. For the first time since she had walked through the door, John didn't have a response. Emily's phone vibrated in her hand as she stepped away from John and Lauren, needing space, needing air, needing a moment to process the nightmare unfolding around her. The message on the screen made her stomach twist with a fresh wave of dread. Are you home? Call me back right away. Something is wrong with your foundation account. The urgency in Megan Carter's words sent a chill down Emily's spine. Megan had been her best friend since college and now worked at one of the city's top banks. If she was reaching out like this, it meant something was very, very wrong. Emily's fingers trembled as she dialed Megan's number, pressing the phone to her ear as she moved toward the hallway, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the two people who had just shattered her world. The phone rang once before Megan picked up, her voice low and tense, laced with concern. Emily, thank God. Where are you? I just got home, Emily whispered, her heartbeat pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself speak. And I walked into something I don't even know how to explain. John has another woman living here, and she's pregnant. He wants me to sign divorce papers and… Megan cut her off, her voice sharp and urgent. Emily, listen to me. Forget the divorce for a second. You need to know that John has been transferring money out of the foundation's accounts for months. He's using forged documents, creating a paper trail that makes it look like you authorized everything. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her entire body going cold as she gripped the phone tighter. What? I ran an internal audit when I saw some irregularities. Megan continued quickly, not giving her time to recover from the shock. John has been moving large sums to offshore accounts. He's covering his tracks well, but I caught the discrepancies before they were buried. If you had signed those divorce papers today, you would have unknowingly given him full legal control over the foundation, and by the time you realized it, the money would have been gone. Emily pressed a hand against the wall, struggling to steady herself as the weight of Megan's words crashed over her. She had suspected John was trying to manipulate her, but she had not imagined it went this deep. How much? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Millions, Megan said grimly. Enough to cripple the foundation permanently. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, bile rising in her throat as she thought of the children, the programs, the years of work that her family had dedicated to the foundation. John hadn't just betrayed her. He had betrayed something far bigger, something meant to help those who had nothing. And then Megan's voice turned even darker. That's not all. Lauren, she's not who she says she is. Emily's eyes snapped open, her breath hitching. What do you mean? Megan hesitated for only a second before delivering the final blow. Her real name is Elizabeth Kaplan. She's a con artist. I did some digging, and she has a pattern. She infiltrates the lives of wealthy men, convinces them she's pregnant, gains their trust, and then vanishes once she's gotten what she wants. She's done this in at least 3 other states. Every single time, the pregnancy was fake. Emily's head spun, her knees nearly buckling as the full scope of the deception unraveled before her. The woman standing in her kitchen, wearing her apron, carrying what she had believed was John's child, was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie. Her voice trembled with barely contained rage as she whispered into the phone, Megan, we need to stop them. On the other end of the line, Megan exhaled sharply, her determination clear. I'm already working on it. Emily felt her pulse pounding in her ears as she forced herself to remain calm, hiding the storm of emotions threatening to consume her. She knew that if she signed the documents in front of her, she would not only lose her home but also forfeit control over the millions of dollars meant for the foundation, money that John had been quietly siphoning away. Every instinct in her screamed to confront him, to demand answers, but she knew that would accomplish nothing. She needed time. She picked up the pen slowly, letting her fingers trace the edge of the divorce papers as if she were carefully reading through them. She furrowed her brow, occasionally flipping back and forth between pages, stalling in the only way she could. She could feel John's gaze on her, studying her, waiting for her to comply, but she refused to give him the satisfaction. Across the room, Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her confident facade showing the first signs of strain. She pulled her phone from the pocket of her dress, her manicured fingers moving quickly across the screen. Emily didn't miss the way she kept glancing toward the door, her expression tight, impatient, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. John exhaled loudly, his frustration growing. Emily, this isn't complicated. You knew this was coming. Let's not drag it out. She lifted her head, forcing a small, calculated smile as she tapped the papers lightly with her index finger. I just want to make sure I understand everything, she said smoothly, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. I wouldn't want to make a mistake, especially with financial matters. John narrowed his eyes slightly, but before he could say anything, Lauren's phone vibrated in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line before she quickly turned it face down on the counter. Whatever message she had received, it hadn't reassured her. The tension in the room thickened, stretching with each passing second. Emily could feel it pressing down on her, an invisible battle of patience playing out between her, John, and the woman who had taken her place. Then the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate. Emily kept her face carefully neutral, but deep inside, she knew this was the moment everything was about to change. The doorbell rang again, sharp and insistent, cutting through the tense silence in the room. John's head snapped toward the sound, his brow furrowing slightly, while Lauren stiffened, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. Emily remained perfectly still, her fingers resting lightly on the divorce papers, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited. John moved first, striding toward the door with the practiced confidence of a man who believed he was always in control. Lauren, however, hesitated, her eyes darting toward her phone once more before she quickly tucked it into her pocket and smoothed down the front of her dress. The moment John pulled the door open, everything unraveled. A team of federal agents stood on the doorstep, their expressions unreadable, their presence commanding. The lead agent, a tall man in a dark suit with sharp, assessing eyes, held up a badge and spoke with an air of absolute authority. John Whitmore and Elizabeth Kaplan, also known as Lauren Davis, you are under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The words sent a visible shockwave through the house. John took an immediate step back, his composure fracturing as confusion flickered across his face, but before he could utter a word, two agents pushed inside, moving with precise efficiency. "This is ridiculous," John snapped, his voice laced with anger as he turned to Emily, as if expecting her to defend him. "She put you up to this, didn't she?" Emily didn't move, didn't speak, only watched as the life he had built on lies and deception crumbled around him. Lauren's reaction was much more telling. Her face drained of color, her carefully curated poise evaporating in an instant. She took a step backward, her hands raising slightly, her lips parting as if searching for an excuse, but before she could utter a single word, an agent was on her, pulling her hands behind her back as the cold snap of handcuffs filled the room. "You don't understand," Lauren stammered, her voice thinner now, no longer dripping with confidence. "This is a mistake. I'm pregnant." "That's funny." The lead agent cut in, his tone laced with cold amusement as he nodded to another officer, who held up a clear plastic evidence bag containing several realistic-looking silicone pregnancy bellies. "Because according to our investigation, you've been pregnant in 3 different states, all to different men with substantial assets." Emily felt a sharp, bitter satisfaction rise in her chest as Lauren's mouth opened and closed uselessly, her ability to manipulate situations failing her in the face of undeniable evidence. John, however, wasn't done fighting. "This is insane," he growled, trying to jerk his arms away as an agent secured his wrists in handcuffs. "I'm a businessman, not a criminal. Whatever she's been doing has nothing to do with me." The agent closest to him remained unfazed, speaking with cool indifference. "That's interesting, considering we've been tracking your financial movements for months. Offshore accounts, fraudulent documents, shell companies transferring millions into private holdings in the Cayman Islands. And thanks to some very useful information provided to us today, we now have all the proof we need." John's eyes flashed with sudden understanding, and for the first time, he looked at Emily not with indifference or dismissal, but with something closer to fear. "You," he said, his voice low and venomous. Emily finally spoke, her voice even and unwavering. "You almost got away with it, John." One of the agents moved past her, heading toward the study where John had kept most of his files, while another disappeared down the hall, clearly prepared to search the house for further evidence. It didn't take long. A moment later, one of the agents reappeared, holding up another evidence bag. "You're going to love this," he said, shaking his head as he tossed it onto the table. Inside was a collection of small, hidden surveillance cameras, ones that had clearly been installed throughout the house. Emily's stomach twisted as she realized the implications. John had been watching her, tracking her movements, monitoring her when she had believed she was alone. The lead agent turned back to John, his expression cold. "Looks like we can add unlawful surveillance to the list." John's entire body tensed, his jaw clenched so tightly that his face turned red with rage. But it didn't matter. It was over. As the agents began leading John and Lauren out of the house, Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one being forced out of her own home. This time, they were the ones leaving. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel struck, sealing the fate of John Whitmore and Elizabeth Kaplan. The weight of justice pressed down on the two of them, their carefully woven lies unraveling in the face of irrefutable evidence. John, once a respected businessman who had built his life on manipulation and deception, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for his role in the financial scheme. His attempts to downplay his involvement, to claim ignorance of Lauren's actions, had fallen apart under the mountain of documents proving his full participation. The offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the diverted charity funds, every single detail had been traced back to him, leaving him no escape. Elizabeth Kaplan, known to Emily as Lauren Davis, received a sentence of over 20 years, her record of prior scams ensuring that she would never be able to con another unsuspecting victim again. The court had uncovered her long history of fraud, her trail of fabricated pregnancies, stolen identities, and financial destruction across multiple states. This time, she had gone too far, and the law had finally caught up with her. With the case closed, the FBI successfully recovered almost all of the stolen money, meticulously tracing the transactions and freezing offshore accounts before John and Elizabeth could flee. The foundation, which had been at the brink of collapse, was restored, its funding reinstated, its programs continuing without the stain of corruption. The art education initiatives, the scholarships, the community projects, all of it was saved, returned to the purpose for which it had been created. Emily, no longer a victim but a survivor, took the shattered remains of her past and transformed them into something powerful. Instead of allowing betrayal to define her, she chose to channel it into her art, creating a groundbreaking exhibition that explored themes of deception, loss, and resilience. The gallery, filled with haunting yet breathtaking pieces, told a story of trust broken and truth revealed, of the masks people wear and the destruction they leave in their wake. As she stood in the exhibition hall on opening night, surrounded by her work, by people who admired her strength rather than pitted her pain, she realized that she had not only reclaimed her life, she had rebuilt it into something stronger, something unshakable, something entirely her own. 6 months later, Emily stood at the entrance of her own gallery, watching as guests filtered in, their eyes drawn to the powerful collection of works that lined the walls. The exhibition, titled The Hidden Truth, The Art of Deception and Recovery, was more than just an artistic statement. It was a testament to survival, to resilience, to the power of reclaiming one's narrative after betrayal. Every piece in the collection told a story, some abstract, others painfully clear, all of them woven with the raw emotion of those who had suffered deception and emerged stronger. The gallery wasn't just a business. It had become a refuge for those who had been manipulated, a space where victims of fraud could find a voice, a community, and a way forward. Through her work, Emily had found a new purpose, one that stretched beyond art and into advocacy. She had begun helping others who had been conned, guiding them toward justice, supporting them in rebuilding their lives, showing them that their suffering did not have to define them. As she greeted guests, FBI agent Cassandra Kim approached her, her expression thoughtful but firm. "Because of your case, we identified 3 more victims of Elizabeth Kaplan," she said, her voice carrying the weight of unfinished battles. "One of them is Claire, from Seattle. She lost nearly everything, just like you." That night, as Emily sat in her quiet apartment, she received an email. "I am still trying to recover from what happened," Claire wrote, her words hesitant but laced with the need for reassurance. "Does it really get any easier?" Emily stared at the screen for a moment, remembering the endless nights of doubt, the days when moving forward had felt impossible. She thought about the pain, the betrayal, but also about the strength she had found in the aftermath. She typed her response carefully, her words filled with the certainty she had fought so hard to gain. "Yes, and you are not alone in this. Let's get together next week." As she hit send, she exhaled slowly, knowing that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living.